y equals mx plus b. Now we already know that m stands for slope, which is rise over run. What about the b? The b is your y-intercept, which is just a fancy way of talking about the starting value. So let's just do a quick real world type of example with this. So let's say that you're saving up for a car and you already have $200 in the bank. Just already, you've been saving up over your lifetime. But now you get a job and you're working, let's say 2 hours a day, and you're making $15 an hour. So your starting value, the amount of money that you have before you ever start your job, is $200. But then with each day that you work, you're making another $15. So after the first day, now you have a total of $215. And after the second day, you have a total of $230. And each day, your amount is going to increase by $15. So that is your rate of change, $15 per hour. That, in this example, 15 is the slope. That is how much is your money increasing for every additional hour that you work. So after your third day, you would be at $245. Okay, so how could we take this information, which should be pretty intuitive to us? How do we take that and put it into this weird formula or equation that looks so mathy? Well, think about what you would do to calculate how much money you would have after the third day if you weren't actually making a table. Wouldn't you say, okay, 3 days, that's 3 days, each day I'm making $15, so that's after 3 days, I'm gonna make $45. But then I also have that $200 that I saved up, so I gotta add that in as well. So 45 plus 200 is going to give me that total amount of 245. So we're looking at this level, right? This part of the table. Okay, well, isn't that the formula? We just did 3 times 15 plus 200. Well, we said that 15 is your m, that's your slope, and 200 was our starting value, b. So what does 3 stand for? Well, that's the number of hours. That's our input, because you could work 2 hours or 3 hours or 100 hours. So your input, x in this case, is how many hours you choose to work, and your output, y, is the amount of money that you would make all together, or that you would have saved. So if we were to take this and write it out with the x and the y in there, then we would have y equals, and then we'd have that slope of 15, I'm going to just put it in front this time, times the x, in this case it was 3, plus 200. There is our y equals mx plus b. So you use these steps on a regular basis anytime you're working with a rate of change. And y equals mx plus b is just a way of making it a formal mathematical procedure that we can always follow. So let's keep on going to the equation of a line in slope-intercept form. So really, whenever you see a question where it's asking you to write the equation of the line, there's 3 things that you need to know. First off, your equation will still have y and x in the equation. Your final answer has to have an x and a y in it, and this represents your input and your output. Second thing you need to know is where to plug in your slope, and the third thing is where to plug in your y-intercept. So really what we're doing is we're going to try to get a number for slope, a number for the y-intercept, and then we're going to leave the x and the y where they are. So in this case, we're going to have to get those numbers from the graph. So let's turn to the graph now and see if we can figure out the slope and the y-intercept of this line that we're given. So let's start with slope. You may remember that on a graph, we can count the squares in order to get our slope. So from this lower point, I'll count a straight up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that gives me a rise of 5. And then I'm going to count over 1, 2, and that'll give me a run of 2. Now it's actually -2 because we went to the left. So do keep in mind that anytime you're counting left or counting down, that's going to give you a negative number for that particular thing, whether it's the rise or the run. So in this case, our slope, rise over run, is +5 over -2. So our entire slope is negative. That should make sense because our line is going down as we read from left to right. Okay, so next we have our y-intercept. So this is just the place where the line crosses with the y-axis. So the y-axis is right here in blue. So where does that black line cross over it? Well, it crosses at this particular point. Now, the y-intercept is just a number. It's just a number of like how far away that point of intersection is from the center of the graph. So we're going to start at the center and just count straight up or straight down depending on where that intercept is. So in this case, we're going to count straight up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So that just means that our y-intercept, B, equals 4. So now that we have these two numbers, we have our slope, we have our y-intercept, we're ready to just plug them into the form and that'll give us the equation. So again, y stays in the equation. That's part of our answer. Equals. Now we have our slope, -5 over 2. Then again, we want to keep the x in the equation. Don't get rid of all of those variables because you need a placeholder for your inputs and your outputs. And then last we have that +4, which is the y-intercept added on. Notice also that the slope is always multiplied by the x, and your y-intercept is always added or subtracted at the end. All right, last problem. Write the equation of the line that passes through the points 2, -1, and 0, -5. I lied. There's one more question after this one. We've got 2 more. All right, so there's 2 ways that we can do this. One way is we can solve for the slope by using the slope formula. So this is the form for slope-intercept form. This is a way of writing the equation of a line. That is different from y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. This is a formula where we plug in 4 different numbers in order to get a single number answer for our slope. With the slope-intercept form, your answer is an equation that has those x's and y's in it. So just keep those 2 things straight. This is a way of getting a single number answer for your slope, and this is a way of representing an entire line using those variables of x and y. Okay, so we could plug in these 2 points. We have our x1, y1, x2, y2, and we could plug those in and solve for our slope. But I would like to actually solve this one by graphing it because sometimes a visual representation is a little bit easier. So let's start by plotting these 2 points. We've got 2, -1. So let's do that one first. We've got over 2, down 1. There's our first point. And let's label it. And then we have our second point, 0, -5. Now 0 means that we're not moving left or right at all. So we're just going straight down from the origin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's our second point, 0, -5. Now, if these 2 points are on the line, then we can draw that line going through them, and that's the line that we're talking about. So now that we've got these 2 points plotted, we can just count the slope by counting the squares like we did before. We have a rise of 1, 2, 3, 4, and a run of 2. Oh, whoops, I wrote the wrong word. Rise of 4, and then a run of 1, 2. We have a positive slope here. So even if you did use the formula, what you would end up with would be a slope of 4 over 2, which equals 2. Okay, so now we know that our slope equals 2. We're halfway there. What about the y-intercept? Well, remember, that's just where your line crosses the y-axis. And in this case, that point was given to us in the form of this point 0, -5. So we can just say right away, we can see that those lines cross at -5. So our y-intercept, b, equals -5. Our last step then is to put it all together into the slope-intercept form. So we have y equals 2 times the x minus 5. And there's our final answer of the equation of that line. Okay, now we're on to our last problem here. Find the x-intercept and the y-intercept of the line with this equation. So this is more an application of slope-intercept form and knowing how we can plug different values in order to find these intercepts. So your x-intercept is the x value when y equals 0. Well, what does that even mean? Well, let's just say I've got some random line that goes like this. Okay, so our x-intercept, that would be the point that crosses over the x-axis. So where does this line cross the x-axis? Well, roughly right here. Okay, so if I were to just write down the coordinates of this point, we're going left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that would be -6, 0. Well, you see how in the y-spot, our y value is 0. Well, what about the y-intercept? Well, we know that the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis, which is roughly, we'll just say it's about right here. So if I were to write these coordinates, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be 0, 5. And notice this time, our x value is 0. So this is what we're getting at with these rules here, that we can find the y-intercept by setting our x value equal to 0 and then solving for y. And vice versa, we can find the x-intercept by setting our y value equal to 0. So it's a little bit opposite. To find the x value, to find the x-intercept, we set the y equal to 0. To find the y-intercept, we set the x equal to 0. So just know it's a little bit backwards there. So let's just do a quick example of what that would be like with this equation. So we have y equals 2x minus 7. Let's start with the x-intercept. We want to plug in 0 for y. So we're going to have 0 equals 2x minus 7, and then we will solve for x. So we would solve for x by adding 7 to both sides. So we have 7 equals 2x, and then divide both sides by 2, and that'll give us an answer of x equals 3.5. So we could write this answer as x equals 3.5, or we could write it as a point where the x value is 3.5, and then what would the y value be? 0, because that's what we plugged in at the beginning. So 3.5, 0. And then we can do the same thing again to solve for the y-intercept. This time, we'll plug in 0 for x. So we have y equals 2 times 0 minus 7. So solving this, we get y equals, well, 2 times 0 is just 0, so y equals negative 7. Now this should make sense because we know that that last number is the y-intercept. So again, it all kind of ties together here. So again, we can write our answer as y equals negative 7, or we can write it as a point with 0 for our x value, and then negative 7 for the y.